Hello, this time I'm testing cheap markers from the DecoTime brand. It's the European brand, so it can be quite hard to get them in the US. I usually do not trust cheap art materials. Cheap gouache and watercolors discouraged me from these techniques for years, and today they are my favorite ones. In this case, the quality of the materials matters a lot. However, after bad experiences with markers of good brands, encouraged by the low price, I decided to give the cheaper ones a chance. I bought a set of 60 colors of alcohol markers and several sets of watercolor markers. The square ones are watercolor markers and the triangular ones are alcohol markers. I like their shapes, they are comfortable to hold and there is less risk of rolling off the desk, although the cat will always manage. Anyway, both types of markers have two tips, the thinner one for drawing lines, the brush one for covering larger areas with color. Caps do not always close perfectly, you need to pay attention to push them tight to prevent the ink from drying out. I did the first test on good quality watercolor paper. The pigments look fine on it, they have vivid colors that mostly correspond to their looks on the caps. We can blend them with water, so it's not so important if we use similar colors in this case, because water creates seamless transitions. Especially on good quality papers. We can use them without adding water, but if you want smooth gradients, then we have to use similar colors. I like that after adding water, as with typical watercolors, it creates this effect of darker edges. And here we have alcohol markers. If you want to have smoother gradients, we have to use more similar colors to each other than with watercolor ones. We have also transparent blender marker to join the color better, but it works good with colors close to each other. So in this case it is important to have a wide range of colors. Also, the granulation happens only on watercolor paper. On a watercolor marker paper they look very smoothly. And also for comparison, the more expensive Ecoline watercolor marker from Talens. I like them, they have vivid colors, painting is pleasant, but they do not have such a wide selection of colors. And many of the more vivid colors are hard to blend together without water, and they cost 10 times more, like literally. They are thicker, so they probably have more ink, but as for the behavior on paper, the difference is not as significant as the difference in price. It's possible that Ecolines wins when it comes to the ink's resistance to fading under sunlight, but at this point I can't judge that. Both water and alcohol markers have a wide range of colors. Interestingly, they use the same color numbers and names, so you will find the same colors in both versions, but as a rule on paper alcohol markers will be darker. The caps do not always fully reflect the shade of the color of the marker, so it's worth making swatches. The first attempt I made with watercolor markers was a quick sketch in a sketchbook. At that time I was seriously disappointed with them. The paper absorbed them strongly, so the colors blended poorly. In addition, they spread too much, which made it difficult to paint details. Surprisingly, on the same paper, alcohol markers behaved better than decent. Here you can see how well the pastel colors blend together. With light colors it's easiest to get smooth transition whether you use watercolor, alcohol or Ecoline markers. With darker colors it can be different. After my failure with the sketchbook paper, I took out a decent watercolor paper to see how an illustration made with watercolor markers without water would look. I started by applying light colors just to be safe and moved toward darker ones, exactly as I would do with watercolor paints. The pigments were vivid, the similar colors blended together very nicely and did not spread on the page, making it easy to paint details. And thin pen tip worked well for this purpose, although I wouldn't mind to have an even thinner line. Not only do related colors blend well together with water, also mixing two colors like purple and brown to get another color, dark brown, as in the case of Nom's vest, works well. This means that we don't need so many colors at all, and as in the case of paints, we can mix the colors we have. I found the effect very satisfying, but I have to say that watercolor paints, even the more expensive ones, are more cost-effective choice, both for your pocket and for the wide range of possibilities. But do these markers combine well with paints? I had to check it out. I picked up another inexpensive sketchbook, this time with better quality, thicker paper. Watercolors, here Kuretake Gansai, 36 colors perform well on it. The watercolor markers I use to add details and shadows behave very nicely on the paints. They do not cause it to blur or dilute. The guessed appearance of Ecoline marker with a very vivid turquoise color allows me to say that there is not so much difference between using cheap or more expensive markers in this way. Both brands do pretty well. I decided to use watercolor markers on the same paper in a different way. Since adding water smudges the pigment, I just added a few dashes of a particular color and spread the rest with a brush on the paper. Economical, so just the way I like it. In this case, the colors don't have to be so close to each other for the water to blend them neatly. Sometimes the lines are still visible after adding water, and this can be treated as a defect or used to add more interesting texture to painted surfaces. When covering an already painted area again, it's better to wait until it dries, otherwise you will start rubbing the paper off. The worse paper, the higher probability of such an unwanted effect. Thin tips will work well for painting lines and details. You can paint over the dried picture with soft crayons, color pencils. After these tests, I already know how I will use my watercolor markers most often, and first of all for quick sketches and refinement of watercolor illustrations. And thanks to them, 2 forgotten illustrations from the abyss of my storage closet were finally finished after months. Markers are good for painting lines, details, and if the strokes are too sharp, you can always soften them with water. Meanwhile, alcohol markers waited patiently for their turn. In this case, combining similar colors looks best, so it's important to have a rich color palette. Too much difference between them is noticeable and even the blender can't combine them smoothly. In the case of painting an old woman, the lines of the sweater are not only to convey the texture of the sweater but also to visually bring the shades of green closer together. The thicker paper from the square sketchbook works very well as a base. They may not have impressed my cat, but they were very pleasant to work with. Encouraged by a successful attempt with the rabbit in the sketchbook with thinner paper, I made another trial, and I used an automatic pencil for the sketch and a waterproof fine liner for the lines, which remain intact even treated with alcohol ink. I'm starting to paint with red areas on the skin to then connect them with a lighter color of similar shade. On this paper the ink spreads out, which helps in filling in larger areas, but is not desirable when it pours outside the contours. The pouring of color near the girl's nose meant that I will need a darker background to mask this accident. When painting the dragon's belly, it's obvious that I don't have enough intermediate colors to create smooth transition with the darker skin on the back, and again I use the trick with the texture to make the colors visually closer together. The blue color of the clouds in the background seems too vivid to me, but that's okay, because I plan to calm it down with another layer of grey, keeping in mind the need of give a darker background to mask the area around the girl's face. Painting larger areas with a marker seems quite tedious compared to painting with paint, but I appreciate the brush tip for all these little nooks and crannies and details that are more difficult when painting with a bigger brush. Regardless of the medium, I like to use dirty purples and blues in the shadow areas, which also makes the image more cohesive. It helps to set the figures in the same lighting. With weaker paper, you can expect that if you don't put something under the painted side, the inks will bleed through to the next pages. I am quite pleased with the finished sketch and the vividness of the colors, although these clouds need to be more layered for a better cover in my opinion. I don't have alcohol marker paper of the same brand, so I used another one. It is good quality with thicker sheets. Already the first layers show that too strong sketching with an automatic pencil slightly muddies the ink color, a lesson for the future to sketch more gently. This paper absorbs colors nicely and doesn't let them spread, making it easier to paint accurately. The brush tip handles great, but for details it's better to change it for the thinner tip. I like how the colors blend together and the streaks which are visible after painting disappear after drying. Repainting an area with the same color darkens it, but it still blends nicely with the already applied color. I start with lighter colors and then apply darker colors on top of them, but there are times when I do the opposite, for example, to change the shade of a previously painted area. The colors immediately after application seems more vivid and darker, but quickly drying they take on softer colors. Again, when I applied larger areas, I wonder how long such a marker will last. I'll probably find out in time. I'm also not happy with the dull look of the areas when I've done the shading with two similar colors on the shirt. I'm eager to add other shades like purples, beiges to liven up the monotonous colors a bit. Finally, I paint the shirt with mint green, which gives the whole thing a shade that more closely matches the color of the surroundings in which the figure is located, making the whole thing look cohesive. I used a thin tip to draw lines, which gives the whole thing an interesting comic-like, maybe even a bit poster-like look. I think the whole thing looks interesting, in a good way, and it was a lot of fun to paint as I stopped comparing the performance with watercolors and thinking about efficiency and economy. So, am I satisfied with the cheap markers? Let it be enough for the answer that week apart I felt a sudden urge to increase my collection with more sets. It's also possible that it's a matter of feeding my inner child who, like most children, loves markers. The larger sets include very useful cassettes that neatly connect to each other and help to store them in the recommended horizontal position. The choice of colors is very wide, some are repeated between sets, but it's rare. I regret that there is no online site where you can buy them by the piece, so I have to hunt for them in the market, and that's my plan. I'm quite surprised by their quality for the price. I think the watercolor markers are a good choice for a pleasant and easy introduction to the watercolor technique. Similarly, in the case of alcohol ones, their good enough quality won't discourage to this technique, and the attractive price allows you to create larger sets, and if we catch the drift, the more likely we will reach for better quality markers. And maybe we will not be afraid to use them.